I love Cursed City, or rather, I love the idea of Cursed City, a cooperative dungeon crawling game that combines the aesthetics of Castlevania with the high quality miniatures production of Games Workshop and my favorite fantasy setting of all time, the Mortal Realms. This game had real promise. Unfortunately, it also broke that promise. The product sold out almost immediately, and without warning, Games Workshop stopped mentioning the product line entirely. There were no hints as to what happened with this board game or why it was no longer available on the web store. It just vanished, and for a while I didn't want to paint the game or make videos about the game because everyone was just kind of bitter about it. Honestly, I was kind of bitter about it. But recently, I've noticed there are a small contingent of fans who are refusing to let this game die. Peter Cooper has been hard at work redesigning the rules for the game, adding better game balance, more variety, and all kinds of new heroes and enemies for the game. 3D printing companies are making their own miniatures, so if you want to, you can go on eBay, buy the boxed game for $50 without the miniatures, and just 3D print your own. And here in Toronto, I've just discovered some people who are designing some 3D printed modular walls for the game to create a really cool 3D board game setup for it. The point is, Cursed City doesn't have to be dead. It doesn't even have to belong to Games Workshop. And if the community wants their own version of this game to be better and better and have more and more expansions, we can just make them ourselves. Last week, my friend Kenny was trying to figure out how to paint his Soulblight army in a Moonlit scheme and came onto the Discord asking for any advice on how to paint something like this beautiful piece by Ulthar on Instagram. So just for fun, I thought I would give it a shot and try to figure out how I would paint a scheme like this. And I liked it so much that I decided to paint all of my skeletons like this and make an entire video on the subject. The first step was to prime everything in black and then block in some of the white highlights with my airbrush. Here you can see I'm not just spraying from above like usual, but I'm actually spraying from the bottom right and the top left of the figure, where I want my two directional light sources to be shining. After this, I dry brushed the entire figure with some white paint to bring out those crisp details. I then applied all the base colors relatively quickly, starting with the metallics. I used Vallejo Metal Color here like I usually do, and I just used their copper and dull aluminum to paint all of the metallic parts, using the key art for the figures as a guide. After this, I mixed up a base color of 1 part Achelian Green, 1 part Wildwood, and 2 parts Contrast Medium to paint all of the plate armor parts that are not metallic colored, and applied this mixture quite generously over all of those parts of the model. After this, I mixed up 1 part Blithe Angels Red, 1 part Ayenden Yellow, 1 drop Wildwood, and 1 drop Contrast Medium to paint all of the cloth parts on the figure. And I also used this color to paint some rust spots on the armor. Finally, I used Skeleton Horde to paint all of the exposed bone on the model, and some Wildwood to paint all of the leather and wooden parts on the figure. To paint the cobblestone base, I used a mixture of 1 drop Achelian Green, 1 drop Ayenden Yellow, 1 drop Wildwood, and 4 drops Contrast Medium. At this point, if you wanted to, you could just add some highlights and shadows and call this figure done. But instead, I'm going to make things a lot more complicated by adding some OSL effects to the figure. But before I show you how we're going to make that happen, I'd like to tell you a little bit about this week's sponsor. Broken Anvil is a small team of artists based out of Seattle who are extremely passionate about the miniatures they make, and they are currently one of my favorite miniature companies on the market today. As you'd expect, all of their models are extremely high quality, easy to paint, and come pre-supported, but I think where Broken Anvil really shines is having a distinct artistic vision that encompasses their entire range, that really makes the figures feel like a distinct brand of high-quality toys that I personally really want to collect and play with. Today, I would specifically like to tell you about their Patreon and this month's big bundle, The Legend of Daymore, which is just this beautifully massive 52-piece collection of Owlfolk and Ratfolk for your 32mm home tabletop games. Their Patreon offers all sorts of other perks, such as discount codes for previous releases, Discord access, and much more. So if this sounds like it's up your alley, you can check out all their links down in the description, subscribe to their Patreon, and let them know that Dana says hi. it's still filming. For a lot of the steps going forward, I'm going to be using my airbrush to achieve the OSL effects, but if you don't have an airbrush, you could easily do this by just having a lot of patience and using glazing effects on the model. To start out, I first used my airbrush to reapply the white ink highlights to the same places that I applied them with our initial underpainting, the top left and the bottom right. I then carefully applied an extremely thin down glaze of mienne yellow to all of the highlighted areas, making sure to leave lots of the existing color visible underneath. After that, I used a very thin down Achelian green to tint just the top left highlight to give it a moonlit look. I then did the same thing to the bottom right corner of the figure, but with a thin down Blood Angel's red to create the look of a nearby campfire or burning building. After this, I thinned down both some pale sand and pale blue with glaze medium, and I used the blue to carefully edge highlight the areas affected by the moonlight, and the sand to edge highlight the areas affected by the red glow. I then used a little bit of the initial armor color mixture that was still on my palette to add some shading to the armor and to help blend all of the colors together by adding bits of it to any areas I thought might catch the moonlight. I did the same thing using some thin down mienne yellow to flavor all of the pale sand highlights and bring out that extra warm glowy feeling in the model, as well as to some of the moonlit parts as well to add some variety. I continued this process, adding more highlights and then glazing over those highlights until I achieved a look that I was happy with. Now, I know this isn't the most accessible tutorial because I use an airbrush and contrast paints, but this is just how I wanted to paint my skeletons using all of the tools I have available, and I think they turned out pretty cool. But if you'd like to check out a tutorial for object source lighting that doesn't require an airbrush, I would encourage you to go and check out 52 Miniatures video from last week, in which he shows you how to do exactly that. This whole process of painting these skeletons brought me a lot of joy and gave me a lot of enthusiasm for painting and playing Cursed City again, and I hope it did the same for you. Thank you so much to Broken Anvil for sponsoring this video. I'm a huge fan of their miniatures, and I would urge you to go and check out the link in the description to check out this month's offerings. I'd also like to extend a huge thank you to all of our lovely patrons, and this week I would especially like to thank The Revenants and This Mini Sucks. If you'd like to see your name up here or check out our extremely welcoming Discord golf community, you can visit patreon.com/DanaHowl. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.